L'honorable député de Regina-Capelle.
After 8 years, the Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. He's desperate and in total freefall. So he announced a gimmicky plan to give a temporary pause to just some families in mostly Liberal-held ridings. Now, the senior Liberal Minister for Newfoundland is proud that this exemption only applies in her region. She even called out Liberals from other parts of the country for not protecting their communities. The Minister for Prairie Development is a Liberal Member of Parliament from Manitoba. It gets cold in Manitoba. So why was he so useless in protecting Canadian families in his area?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we discussed in the House yesterday, the focus of this program is enabling affordability, getting people off of heating oil, which is more than double, on average, the cost of natural gas in this country. It is about reducing carbon emissions at the same time. It is an important step forward for climate. It is an important step forward in terms of addressing a key affordability issue, and certainly it is good public policy.
L'honorable député de Regina-Capelle.
The carbon tax is a complete failure. It drives costs up, hasn't allowed the government to hit their own emissions targets, and now the Bank of Canada confirms that the carbon tax alone is responsible for 16% of the extra inflation plaguing Canadians. And now with this announcement, families who heat their homes with clean Canadian natural gas will be punished just for living in areas where the Prime Minister is massively unpopular. He once said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. So will he stop his divisive tactics and take the carbon tax off of home heating for all Canadians, Mr. Speaker?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said before, the focus going forward is ensuring affordability and addressing climate change. The honourable member is entitled to his opinions, but he's not entitled to make up his own facts. At the end of the day, 80% of people in this country get more money back in a rebate than they actually pay in terms of the carbon price. This is a program that is focused very much on addressing both climate change and affordability. It is something that my honourable colleague across the way would not understand because they simply don't have a plan to address climate change at all.
L'honorable député de Simcoe Nord.
Mr. Speaker, this government's recent announcement is a comedy in the making. The Liberals said that they could not deviate from their carbon tax plan. They said that extreme weather, hurricanes, floods, and fires demanded that they quadruple the carbon tax. They challenged anybody. They said anybody who challenged it was a Luddite. They said people get more in rebates than they pay, except last week they said when they pause the tax, it's actually making life more affordable. Canadians are realizing this Prime Minister's not worth the cost. So why won't they just cut the tax on all forms of home heating for everybody this winter?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind this House that before we came into power in 2015, emissions projection by 2030 were going to be 80 million tons above our 2005 levels. We've now brought this down to 50 million tons below our 2005 levels. That's the equivalent of removing from our roads 20 million gas-powered vehicles, Mr. Speaker. We have the best record in the G7 for reducing greenhouse gas emissions over the last few years, and we will continue to work for Canadians to fight climate change and to help with affordability.
L'honorable député de Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, as inflation continues to remain, Canadians are realizing the Prime Minister is not worth the cost, and the Bank of Canada is concerned that the soft landing that it once projected is now much narrower. That's because economic uncertainty is increasing while inflation still hasn't been tamed. Two things the government could do to help the Bank of Canada tame in inflation is cancel the carbon tax and reduce its spending. So why is the government not taking these two very simple ways to make the Bank of Canada's job harder to bring inflation down for Canadians?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, it's wonderful to hear the Conservatives quoting the Governor of the Bank of Canada, someone that they wanted to fire a few months ago. But it's surprising and it's wonderful because if we actually listen to what the Governor of the Bank of Canada said, he said that carbon pricing was contributing 0.15% to inflation and that cutting carbon tax would have no long-term effect on inflation and no effect past that 1 year. So if the Conservatives are serious about helping Canadians, let's get supportive of what this government is doing to increase affordability and stop peddling whatever it is that they're trying to peddle.
I'm sure that everyone would love to hear the question from the honourable member from Mégantic-l'Érable. You have the floor. Last week, the Liberal Prime Minister looked at the polls and panicked. After 8 years, he realised that the common-sense Conservatives were right to say that the carbon tax was creating inflation and increasing the cost of absolutely everything. Once again, the Liberal Prime Minister has completely forgotten Quebecers who are also racked by the stress of not being able to feed their families. We know that the Bloc Québécois wants to radically increase the carbon tax, but that's certainly not what Quebecers chose. It's expensive to vote for the Bloc. Does the Prime Minister understand that he's simply not worth the cost? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what surprises a lot of people in this House and those who are watching us at home is that a party that wants to be government has absolutely no plan to fight climate change, no plan to adapt. Yesterday in La Presse, we heard that floods in Quebec this summer cost our farmers and producers $150 million. That's a direct impact of climate change. The Conservatives want to make polluting free. They want to make the climate crisis even worse, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Do you know what's even more shocking, Mr. Speaker, is that after 8 years, every month, 1 in 10 Quebecers used food banks in 2023. After 8 years of this Liberal regime, the Bloc wants to continue to punish the middle class by radically increasing the inflationary carbon tax, and the Liberals are picking and choosing who will see their bill reduced according to the colour they voted for. This is unacceptable, divisive and unfair to Quebec families. Will the Prime Minister finally understand that he is not worth the cost and announce the complete and permanent withdrawal of the second carbon tax, which will punish Quebecers? The Honourable Minister for the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what is shocking is that there are at least 4 members of the Quebec Conservatives who in the past voted for carbon pricing. And today, the weather vane has shifted because the wind of the leader has changed to be against climate change. And so they want to do nothing to help Canadians fight against the impact of climate change and to reduce our pollution, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for